The wind howled through the empty expanse of the arena as the last echoes of the battle faded into the silence of the aftermath. The dust settled, and all that remained were the fallen warriors, some dead, some barely alive. Among them stood a lone figure, his chest heaving with the weight of the battle he had just survived. His armor was scratched and battered, his sword stained with the blood of countless foes. Yet the warrior's eyes, though weary, burned with an unspoken determination. He had fought hard, not just for survival, but for something deeper, something more profound. His name was Darius, a skilled fighter, known across the lands for his unmatched strength and unwavering resolve. But in this moment, all his power and pride meant little. The battle was over and the real struggle was yet to begin. As he walked through the smoke-filled arena, his eyes scanning the fallen bodies, something caught his attention. There, amidst the carnage, was a woman. Her long golden hair shimmered, like the sun, even in the dim light of the dusk. She lay motionless, her armor cracked and bloodied. Her sword, once gleaming with power, now lay shattered on the sand beside her. She was one of the enemy, a fierce warrior from a rival clan who had fought relentlessly against his own people. Yet, in that moment, as Darius looked at her, he did not see an enemy. He saw something else, something that stirred deep within him, something he couldn't yet understand. He approached cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the soft sand beneath him. He had fought beside many warriors, but never had he felt this strange pull toward one of them. There was a connection here, one that defied the boundaries of their clans, their bloodshed, and their duty. It was as though the universe had woven their fates together, and he was now caught in its intricate web. He knelt beside her, his eyes tracing the contours of her face. Her skin was pale, her features delicate despite the blood and dirt that stained her. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still alive, barely. She had fought valiantly, he could tell, and now she lay broken, defeated. Yet there was something about her, something that made Darius pause. His fingers brushed lightly over her broken sword, the symbol of her strength. It was no longer the weapon it once was. The once sharp edge was now jagged, and the hilt was cracked. It seemed almost as though the sword itself had shared in her pain, her defeat. But as his fingers touched the remnants of the weapon, something strange happened. A sense of reverence washed over him, and he felt an inexplicable bond between them, a bond forged not by bloodshed but by something deeper. He could feel her pain, her struggle, her battle, as though they were one. His mind raced. How was this possible? She was his enemy, someone he was supposed to despise, yet all he felt was this strange, undeniable connection. The warrior's heart pounded in his chest as he lifted the broken sword from the ground. It was heavier than it looked, not in terms of weight, but in the weight of the history it carried. It symbolized a life of conflict, a life of pain, and yet, there was something almost sacred about it. He didn't know why, but the moment his hands closed around the hilt, he felt as though he was not just holding a weapon, he was holding a piece of her strength, her spirit, and perhaps her very soul. As he gazed at the broken sword in his hands, the silence of the arena enveloped them both. It was as if time had stopped, and for a brief moment, the world ceased to exist. In that silence, Darius realized something profound. He was no longer just a warrior. He was something else, something more vulnerable, more human. He looked down at the woman once more. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but she was still unconscious, unaware of the moment that was unfolding between them. He could leave her here, let her fate run its course. After all, she was the enemy, a threat to his people. But something inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him that this moment was not just about survival. It was about something far greater, something that had the power to change everything. The decision weighed heavily on him. He could end her life and ensure his victory, but what would that really mean? What would he become if he gave in to the hatred and bloodshed? Or he could take her with him, offer her a chance at life, a chance for redemption. even though it went against everything he had ever been taught. For the first time in his life, Darius wasn't sure what the right choice was. He had always lived by the sword, but this moment, this woman, had made him question everything he thought he knew about honor, duty, and fate. He took a deep breath, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like the heat of the midday sun. Slowly, he placed the broken sword back onto the ground beside her and lifted her gently in his arms. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, he felt as though his destiny was no longer his to control. It was as though their fates had already been written. As Darius carried her out of the arena, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the sand. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. And with each step he took, he knew that the journey ahead would be unlike anything he had ever known. This was just the beginning. The days after the battle were heavy with tension and uncertainty. The air seemed thick with the scent of smoke and dust, remnants of a war that had torn through everything. Darius, the once unshakable warrior, now found himself questioning everything he had known. He had carried the fallen woman, the enemy, from the arena and into his camp. His comrades had looked at him with confusion, some with suspicion, but none had dared to question him directly. They knew the weight of his decisions carried more than just personal significance. It would affect the very course of the war. The woman, who had been unconscious for days, finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a soft groan. Darius had been sitting by her side, watching over her when he saw the first sign of life. The sight sent a ripple of relief through him, but it also brought with it a strange sense of responsibility that he hadn't expected. She was no longer just a fallen enemy. She was someone in need of care, someone he had chosen to protect. But why? She slowly opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his with a mix of confusion and wariness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions, doubts, and the lingering weight of their past. She was the enemy, the woman who had fought against his people. Yet as she looked at him, Darius saw not an enemy but a warrior, a person who had been shaped by the same pain and loss he had experienced. What happened? She whispered hoarsely, her voice rough from both the battle and the days of unconsciousness. You were injured, Darius replied, his voice calm but tinged with something else, something unrecognizable. I saved you. She frowned as though trying to piece together the fragments of memory. Her eyes drifted to her broken sword, still lying nearby. The sight of it seemed to bring a wave of emotion, but it was fleeting. She shifted, sitting up slowly, wincing at the pain in her side. Despite her injuries, there was a fire in her eyes, an undeniable strength that Darius could not ignore. Why didn't you kill me? She asked, her voice sharper now, filled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. You should have finished what we started. Darius felt the weight of her words, but instead of responding immediately, he looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the pain in her eyes, the pain of a warrior who had given everything in the name of a cause, only to be left with nothing. He understood that pain all too well. You didn't deserve to die like that, Darius finally said, his words simple but filled with a deep sincerity. You fought with honor, even if we were on opposite sides. Her expression softened, but she quickly masked it with a frown. So, what now? Are we allies? He shook his head, the complexity of their situation settling in his chest like a stone. I don't know, he admitted, but I can't leave you to die. Not after everything. She studied him for a long moment as if trying to read him. Finally she spoke, her voice low and guarded. You don't know anything about me. And you don't know anything about me, he replied. But maybe we don't have to know everything to understand each other. The words hung in the air, both raw and unexpected. It was clear they were two people bound by the same world, shaped by the same war. Their initial hatred, their past as enemies, felt distant now. The war that had brought them to this point had done something else, something neither of them had anticipated. It had made them see each other not as foes, but as two people trying to to survive in a world that had been torn apart by conflict. The woman, whose name was Elysia, turned her gaze away, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. "I don't trust you," she said quietly. "But I also don't have a choice. We're both caught in this mess." Darius nodded, understanding more than she realized. They were trapped by forces far greater than their individual battles. In that moment, they were both just survivors, clinging to whatever scraps of hope they could find. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust had to be earned. But something in him wanted to believe that they could find a way to make it through this together. As the days passed, Darius and Elysia trained together, learning from each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. Elysia was skilled in combat, her movements fluid and precise, a reflection of the years of discipline she had endured. Darius, on the other hand, was a brawler, a fighter who relied on strength and speed. But when they trained side by side, something clicked. They began to complement each other in ways neither of them had expected. Where Darius lacked finesse, Elysia brought precision. Where she struggled with raw power, he made up for it with brute strength. Their training sessions became a quiet battlefield of their own. Each move was a lesson in trust. Each sparring match was a reminder that they were no longer enemies, but allies, bound together by a shared need for survival. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. Their connection was undeniable, even though neither of them was willing to fully acknowledge it. The turning point came one evening when they were ambushed by a group of soldiers from Elysia's old faction. They had been tracking her for days, and now they were determined to finish what they had started. Darius and Elysia fought side by side, their movements synchronized as if they had been fighting together for years. Their bond, forged in the heat of battle, was now their greatest strength. Elysia fought with a ferocity Darius had never seen before. She was no longer the defeated warrior lying in the sand. She was the warrior who had risen from the ashes, and her power was undeniable. Darius, too, felt something change within him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something more, something that had nothing to do with the war or the battles they had fought. He was fighting for her. When the last of the soldiers fell, the two of them stood amidst the chaos, breathing heavily, their bodies covered in sweat and blood. There was no victory cheer, no sense of triumph, just silence. But in that silence, something had shifted. They weren't just two warriors caught in a world of violence anymore. They were something more, something unspoken, yet understood. Their fates, once separate, were now inextricably linked, and neither of them could deny it. The days following their victory were filled with uneasy silence. Darius and Elysia continued their journey together, but there was a palpable distance between them, a tension neither could ignore. Though they had fought side by side, their bond was not yet fully formed. Trust, once broken, was not so easily repaired. The weight of their shared past, the history of war and bloodshed, hung heavily over them like a dark cloud. As the days stretched into weeks, the small camp they had set up became their temporary refuge from the chaos of the war. It was a place where they could catch their breath, but it was also a place where the demons of their pasts came to haunt them. Darius often found himself staring into the fire, his mind lost in thought. The battle, the decisions he had made, and the strange connection he felt toward Elysia all gnawed at him. He was no longer sure of anything. He had always been certain about his mission, his duty, but now he wasn't so sure. Elysia, too, struggled. At first, it had been easy for her to see Darius as the enemy, another warrior from a rival clan. But now, after everything they had been through, she couldn't keep denying the bond that was forming between them. She had always believed that love was a weakness, something that could be exploited in the chaos of war. But as she spent more time with him, she began to question everything she had ever known. He was not the monster she had imagined. He was a man of honor, someone who had sacrificed just as much as she had. Yet the walls she had built around herself were not so easily torn down. Every time she looked at him, there was this pull in, her chest, a desire to reach out to trust him. But she couldn't. Her heart had been broken too many times before, and the scars ran too deep. What would happen if she allowed herself to care for him? Would he leave her when the war was over? Or would he betray her like everyone else had done in the past? Darius could see the conflict in her eyes, the walls she had built to protect herself. He wanted to break through them, wanted to be the one she could trust, but he didn't know how. The last thing he wanted was to hurt her, to push her away, but every time he tried to get closer, it felt as though she pulled further away. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of training, Darius sat by the campfire, sharpening his sword. He was tired, physically and mentally. The war, the constant fighting, had worn him down, more than he cared to admit. He hadn't realized how much of himself he had given to the battle until he met Elysia. For the first time in his life, he was questioning what he was fighting for. Was it just survival? Or was there something more? As he worked, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He didn't have to turn around to know it was her. He had grown attuned to the sound of her presence, to the subtle way she moved. Elysia stood just behind him, her shadow cast long in the firelight. He could feel the weight of her gaze on his back, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice low and hesitant. Darius set down his sword and turned to face her. "I'm always quiet," he replied, his tone heavier than usual. "I have a lot to think about." Her brow furrowed as she took a step closer. "What's bothering you?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. How could he explain what was weighing on him? How could he make her understand the confusion that had taken root inside him? He had always been certain of his mission, but now everything felt uncertain. "I don't know," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "This war, it's not what I thought it would be. I thought if we won, if we killed enough of them, it would all make sense. But it doesn't. It just feels like I'm losing pieces of myself along the way." Elysia stood there, studying him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: empathy. She too had lost pieces of herself in this war, but she had always kept her walls up, her heart closed off. Now, standing before Darius, she realized how much she too was struggling. She had never let anyone see her vulnerability, but here, in this quiet moment with the firelight flickering between them, she allowed herself to feel something, a connection. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady, but her heart pounding. "We're all losing something in this war, but that doesn't mean we have to lose everything." Darius looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of sincerity. "How do you keep going? How do you keep fighting when it feels like it's all for nothing?" Elysia stepped closer, the space between them shrinking with each word. "Because sometimes we fight not for the war, but for the moments in between," she said, her voice barely audible. "We fight for the people who matter, for the connections we make even in the darkest of times." Darius swallowed hard. The words hit him deeper than he expected. He had always been a fighter, a warrior, but he had never stopped to think about the purpose behind it all. In that moment, standing beside Elysia, he realized that he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something more, something he hadn't been able to define until now. But even as their bond grew stronger, the conflict within them both continued to build. The war raged on, and with it, the pressure to choose sides, to stay loyal to their respective clans. Every day, the choice became harder. Could they trust each other? Could they survive together in a world that wanted them apart? The journey ahead was uncertain, and as they both stared into the fire, they knew that the real battle was not just against the enemies on the battlefield. It was the battle within themselves, the struggle to let go of the past and embrace the future that was slowly unfolding between them. Suspense. As the war continued to tear the world apart, would Darius and Elysia be able to break free from their inner struggles? Or would their pasts pull them back into the chaos? The tension between them was thick, and only time would tell if their bond was strong enough to survive the battles ahead. The war had reached its peak, the tension in the air thick with the promise of destruction. Darius and Elysia had been through so much together, their bond growing stronger with every passing day. What had started as an uneasy alliance had now become something far deeper, a connection that neither of them could deny. But the war was far from over, and the enemies they faced were more powerful than anything they had encountered before. The final battle loomed ahead, and with it, the ultimate test of everything they had fought for. The morning before the battle, Darius stood at the edge of their camp, staring out at the horizon. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the desolate landscape. He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, the pressure of the choices he had made, and the ones still to come. His mind raced with the memories of everything that had led him to this point, the bloodshed, the battles, and the moment he had lifted Elysia's broken sword. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but now standing on the brink of their final confrontation, he understood that the true cost of this war was not just the blood that would be spilled. It was the sacrifices that each of them would have to make to see it through to the end. Elysia appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. She had been quiet all morning, her thoughts as heavy as his. She had always been a fighter, a warrior who never backed down from a challenge. But now, with the stakes higher than ever, she was no longer sure of the path they were on. The war had taken everything from her, and now it threatened to take the one thing she had found, her connection with Darius. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though there was a trace of uncertainty beneath the surface. Darius turned to her, his heart heavy. He had never been more unsure of anything in his life. "I don't know if anyone is ever truly ready for this," he replied, his tone grim. "But I know that we have to do this, for the people we care about. For the future." Elysia nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We fight because we have no other choice, but we also fight because we believe in something greater than ourselves." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, the weight of their shared journey seemed to settle over them both. They had fought so hard to get to this point, and yet, they knew that the real test was still ahead. The battle they were about to face would be unlike anything they had experienced before. It would require everything from them, not just their strength, but their very souls. The enemy forces were approaching, their numbers overwhelming. The battlefield was set, and Darius and Elysia stood side by side, ready to face whatever came their way. The plan was simple: hold the line long enough to give their people a chance to escape. It was a suicide mission, but there was no other choice. The lives of countless innocent people depended on their success. As the battle raged on, Darius and Elysia fought with everything they had. The sound of steel clashing against steel, the cries of the wounded, and the screams of war filled the air. They were in the heart of the chaos, their swords cutting through the enemy lines, but even as they fought, a dark realization settled over them. The enemy was relentless, and their forces were endless. At the height of the battle, Darius saw the leader of the opposing army, a ruthless commander who had caused untold suffering to both their people. The commander was closing in on them, his soldiers surrounding them on all sides. Darius knew this was it, the final confrontation. But as he moved to face the commander, something unexpected happened. Elysia, in a moment of pure instinct, stepped in front of him, her sword raised high. "No," she said, her voice fierce. "This battle is mine to finish." Darius froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what she was about to do. She was going to sacrifice herself to save him, to end the war once and for all. But he couldn't let her. Not after everything they had been through, not after everything they had fought for. "Elysia, no!" he shouted. But it was too late. With one final devastating strike, Elysia charged toward the commander. She fought with a fury that seemed to come from deep within her, but the enemy was too strong. The commander struck her down with a swift blow, sending her crashing to the ground. Darius watched in horror as Elysia fell, her body crumpling in the dirt. The world seemed to slow around him, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. He had lost her. The one person who had made him believe in something beyond the war. The one person who had shown him what it meant to care, to fight for love and not just survival. But then, something unexpected happened. As Elysia lay there, her breath shallow, she reached out for Darius, her hand trembling. "Darius," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm not afraid." Tears filled his eyes as he knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he held her. "Don't leave me," he begged, his voice breaking. "Please, don't leave me." But Elysia smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "I've already given everything. But I'm not afraid. I know you'll keep fighting. For us. For everything we believed in." With those final words, Elysia's hand fell limp in his. She was gone. The battle raged on, but for Darius, the world had stopped. His heart ached with the loss, but he knew that Elysia's sacrifice had not been in vain. The war was not over, but it was now his fight alone. And he would carry her memory with him, using it as the fuel to continue the battle, not just for survival, but for everything they had fought for. Love, hope, and a future beyond the war. As the sun set on the battlefield, Darius stood tall, the broken sword of Elysia clenched in his hand. He would never forget her, and he would make sure that her sacrifice was honored. The war might not be over, but Darius knew one thing for certain. He was not alone. Their fates had become one, and that was a bond that even death could not break. Ending. The war may have taken everything from them, but it could not take their love. The ultimate sacrifice had been made, and Darius, now alone, stood ready to finish what they had started, carrying the memory of Elysia with him into the future.